they can do their job and probably effectively. But when you ask them to take a step back and say, okay, what are the things you do every day? What are the tasks associated with those? What are the subtasks? It's probably 20 to 30 tasks that they perform with their job, but they don't know what they are because they just do them. But now with this, in order to, like you said, people want like the LLM or the AI thing just to magically do everything for them. But the real answer lies buried somewhere in that list of 30 things that they do, right? There are a few opportunities there. You're probably doing some of that now, right? With some of the folks you work with.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying brings up, I think, 2 points that I've seen. I had this conversation with a friend of mine who's very much on the engineering side, and you hear a lot about like agentic applications, right? I think there's an assumption, and what you're seeing in apps, and this is actually the approach that I'm taking to some extent in some cases, is you could take a path. Let's say you're trying to map an end-to-end workflow. I want to perform this, right? And it's a multi, your point, it's a multi-step process. How do you orchestrate that, right? I think there's an approach where you try to dissect it as much as possible into individual subtasks, and you build these smaller agents, right, that are geared towards this one task, and then you can put them together either through another agent or your workflows codified in software. And I think, or you take the other approach, which is that part of the value here is I don't have to get down to the granular. I'm just going to tell it what the end state looks like and let the thing kind of roam free a little bit. I think what you find is how important is it that you are deterministic in the path you take. And I think in some industries, you need that deterministic path because there's regulatory requirements, there's like real importance to the underlying individual steps, where in other cases, there might not be. You just care that you got to the answer. It doesn't really quite matter how you got to the answer, but in some industries, it does. So I think you also start to see some of that as you think through how to map this and how to systematically think about decomposing a problem, because then you have to codify all of that. That's the other part. You have to first, and when me or anyone on my team tries to tackle a brand new problem, for make it AI, right? Make it AI friendly, build AI software. You really just start like we start and I start just observing. Like I just sit with the people doing the job and I just see them do the job. What do you do? Oh, why did you do that? Why did you
Yeah.
click this? Why are you going in this thing? And then it's my job as a product manager to discern, is this important? Is this just a tool? Is this part of the deliverable? And then you codify
Is
all
it
of
an
that.
opportunity that they don't see? Yeah.
And you also, one of the points you just made around systematic thinking and decomposing is also a conversation that I have a lot around interfaces for Gen AI applications. I think there's obviously the easiest thing to do is we'll just put chat in front of your app. But chat's not usually the best experience for these multi-step processes. And to your point, the majority of the users that are not tech people don't actually know how to decompose the problem well enough to prompt their way through work. So
Right.
even if you give them all the tools, you do leave a lot of room for stuff to get lost, and you lose the deterministic nature of it. Whereas if you were to build some of this stuff in like an app that's purpose built for a domain with a core workflow, and chat's really useful for certain things, you should definitely have it, but it doesn't drive some of the work. And that's some of the things that I've seen as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's often like where my journey with this all started was not in chat at all. And it was way before, not way before, but it was before the chatbots came out. And this is 2018. And we were like pounding on how to predict hospital readmissions and predict chronic disease values and all of this sort of thing. And we weren't using an interactive interface at all. We were using creating algorithms, machine learning algorithms to do this stuff. But to your point, it was interacting behind the scenes to optimize
Right.
targeted at specific workflows. And it raises this kind of imperative to have change management as the priority versus AI as the priority. So it's like you can't if you're not open to the process of thinking about where an LLM may fit, or more importantly, where you do work, how can you talk about where an LLM may fit or anything? You call it Bob, right? Bob could fit to help you with your day. Like in those scenarios where you're observing the workflow, what do you say to people to get them not to worry about losing their job or thinking that whatever this guy's doing, if I tell him everything he needs to know, like he's just going to replace me. Like, how do you get over that? And we can talk about whether that's a rational fear and irrational fear, but it is reality.
Yeah, and look, I've gone through that my whole career. So my before even this whole AI chapter, my first job was with a platform as a service company. How I sold and we went to market with platform as a service was all around efficient app deployment and scaling. Now, I had the difficult task sometimes of training people whose job was actually to deploy VMs and apps. And here I was coming with a product literally to replace them. There was nothing, I had a hard time dancing around it because all they did was stand up a VM and copy bits to a VM.
Yep.
And here I was with a button click that just did it for them. Now, I saw two different paths. I saw people just trying to crash into it as hard as they could and try to make sure that I was not successful. And in some cases that happened, right? I'm like, we lose the opportunity, you make it a lot harder. In other cases, some of the people that really succeeded is they said, look, this is the future. My value is not in starting or stopping a VM. And they became the owners of this new way of writing and deploying apps and went to lead this transformation project within central IT. And I think with AI is very similar. I don't think that technology is there to. So I think there's two things. One, the tech is really not there to wholesale replace a bunch of people.
Sure.
I think can that technology replace some of the tasks that some people do? Yeah, 100%. There's already. I work in an industry where some of the bulk of the hours go to people just reading documents and answering questions. They will tell you that the value being provided by just reading 100 regulatory documents to point out, oh, you might care about this. Like, there's very little value there. So it'll probably reduce the amount of people you need to run the same amount of projects, but it will allow the people to be a lot more value oriented. Look, your value is not that you can read and draw this thing quicker than someone is. You actually understand what you did. You can explain it. You can help the customer navigate. You can help your end user understand what they're doing better and turn your expertise at that point into your insight into something that's value. It's more value generating than just toil repetitive work. I think some jobs, some tasks within a role will definitely go away. Some roles will get elevated to focus less on the annoying part and the repetitive part and more on, okay, what do you do with that information, which should always in the end be what you're trying to do anyways. So I think that's going to be one part. The other one is it also does open up the possibility for even more work. And that should make the people doing this even
Yeah.
more valuable. I'll give you an example. One of the projects we're working on, one of the products that we're building primarily, I can't get into the specifics, but primarily targeted very large companies because the services product they sold was a lot of people doing work. So smaller companies just didn't have access. Like they just couldn't afford to do this. By taking these people's expertise, codifying it into a product and using AI to do a lot of the heavy lifting, we've now opened up a whole market that they just didn't even touch before. There's more work now to do
Right.
because you have a broader market, because you've lowered the barriers to entry.
So you're keying on something which is like a slight nuance on the language because what people see are we're using AI, therefore we can lay off 4,000 people. The reality of these like headlines is that they're not true. The reality is that those layoffs are from something else. AI is the
Right.
scapegoat, right? Like that's not actually happening, but it still doesn't matter because it's in the psyche now, right? Oh my
Right.
God, it's coming for me. But what I'm sad about is that we're not talking more, and you were saying this, we're not talking about bandwidth. We're not talking about increasing the bandwidth of a person being doing work because that is the reality. And as when we were talking about those tasks and subtasks, I bet if you sat down and figured out what those 20 to 30 things were, you would come up with a bunch of them that you don't want to do anymore. Right?
Yeah, 100%.
That are like annoying, they're repetitive, they're things that you wish something could do for you. Maybe that's I don't know, maybe that's a better way to approach this. The other thing that I heard recently is that why don't we, especially in these scenarios, before the process even starts, guarantee these people's jobs, right? To say, look, your job is guaranteed. Now work with Erik to
Yeah.
figure out how to improve what you do.
It is tough. There are going to be jobs that are not needed anymore. Like that is also going to be
Sure,
true.
but to your point, like it's not to say that the person doing those things or half of those things or whatever the percentage is can't be doing something else. So
Oh, 100%.
so it changes like the staffing plan. It doesn't create an opportunity to do a riff. And so it's like the current narrative, the current perception is incredibly flawed. I think it makes it hard to be able
Yeah,
to do this work.
it does definitely make it a lot harder. And I think with any of these technological shifts, you saw it. Is there room for a rift? The probably is to some extent, but to your point, like that's coupled to people weren't going to be able to outgrow their roles anyways. Like at some point, whether this technology came or not, in some cases, it was going to be difficult. But one of the things you are saying is very true is what at least I've seen is people want to be able to deliver more value in what they're doing. And I think if the technology can help you do that by automating, by making you more insightful when you have a conversation, by taking over things that you had to do before that took you away from doing something else, 100% can become an enabler for you to do an even better job, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to that.
On that topic, I need to dig this up, but I heard recently about a BCG study a couple of years ago that they had a experimental group and a control group. Experimental group used ChatGPT for consulting activities. The controller group did their normal thing. And there were some really interesting findings. So like in consulting, like we're on completely different like ends of the consulting world, right? You're working for
Right.
a big consulting shop. I'm by myself. So where like does this make me more competitive next to an EY? Like how are you seeing the competitive pressures?
I think it does. I think it levels the playing field in some cases because it allows solo operator or a smaller team to act like they're a much bigger team, right? Because you can, like I said, like and you said, can automate a lot of different things. Where still, I think, where big companies still have a moat that they can try to protect is they have developed, to your point, doing the job is also knowing how to do the job, like deconstructing it and knowing what to provide. Big companies do have yet, or they have a big moat, which is they've amassed a vast amount of how to do the things really well in a repetitive fashion, codified, normalized. They have a depth and a breadth of information. In the end, to going back to the analogy on the intern, if you give the intern the right instructions and the right information, they'll probably do a really good job. An overeager intern that's ready to prove themselves. What a big company has is they have the right information to fit it at the right time. They understand because they've trained a workforce all the way from a new hire to the top. They've codified really well how to incrementally
Also,
deliver these things. So now it's a matter of capturing that. And I think that's the mode that big companies have.
yeah.
Solo operators don't necessarily have that, but they do have the agility to just try things out very quickly. And you now have this scale that you didn't have before.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And obviously the resources to hire like many experts instead of just one. However, it is interesting because I don't, you need, in my view, LLMs don't work unless they're managed by an expert, right? And I don't mean
100%.
an expert in the technology and the domain, right? Because if you ask the wrong questions, if you don't evaluate the answers, you end up doing garbage out. It's not helpful. You can't break down the task. To your point,
And you don't
definitely.
know how to discern whether it's, to your point, hallucinating. And if I go right now to one of the LLMs and I start asking a bunch of medical questions, it's going to sound very knowledgeable.
Yep.
I'm not a doctor. I don't actually have the ability to know whether what it's saying, even if it sounds correct, to actually know if it's correct, I don't. So you touched, so two things. One interesting thing that I read is part of why that happens is because these models, part of the human and the reinforcement learning is these LLMs have learned that they'll get a thumbs up versus a thumbs down during training if
Mhm.
they sound confident. When they say, I don't know, it's a thumbs. So they've optimized for sounding confident, even if they don't actually know what they're doing. You brought up another good point, which is domain expertise is incredibly important. So I think what an LLM did is they provide a horizontal level of information that you just didn't have access to before. So now you have 50% of the way there. To my point before, getting from 50% to 100% or even 80% is extremely hard.
Yeah.
You still need domain experts that do this job, that understand how to do it, to tune and codify best practices. And that's going to be a key differentiator.